Elegy of the Kiss, that cut me a sequel to his kiss. The guillotine, the contrition center smelled like bleach and burnt copper. Cale had been processed for 72 hours, stripped, cataloged, his body mapped by sensors that measured everything the ministry considered dangerous. They'd found the ink stains impossible to remove, even with their chemical baths. The marks went deeper than skin. Now he sat in cell 7, Block C, waiting for the procedure that would turn him into someone who no longer remembered why he'd ever wanted to be himself. The cell was perfectly gray. No windows, no books, no pencils, nothing that might suggest the world contained beauty worth dying for. Just a cot bolted to the wall and a drain in the floor for the tears the chip would soon make impossible. He closed his eyes and counted his stones. Marin, her face in those final moments, blazing with recognition. The way she'd laughed as her heart stopped. Like someone finally understanding the punchline to a joke the universe had been telling all along. Before her, David, a musician who'd played forbidden melodies on a homemade violin. He'd asked for the kiss mid-song, his fingers still moving across the strings as the severance took him. The music had ended, but the silence after had been holy. Before him, Lucia, a mother who'd had her children taken to the youth reformation centers, who'd chosen one moment of pure love over years of supervised, chemically moderated affection. 12 names, 12 faces, 12 revolutions contained in a kiss. The door hissed open. Cale didn't look up. He knew the routine. They'd send a counselor first, someone trained to extract confessions, to map the neural pathways of resistance so the procedure could target them precisely. Then the surgeons. Then the forever after of forgetting. "Hello, Cale." The voice made him open his eyes. She stood in the doorway in ministry whites, her hair pulled back severely, a data tablet clutched against her chest. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark skin and darker eyes that held something the regulation haircut and clothes couldn't quite extinguish. A spark, barely visible, like embers under ash. "I'm Dr. Sienna Cross," she said. "I'll be conducting your pre-procedure evaluation." "Of course you will." He leaned back against the wall. "Let me guess. You'll ask about my childhood trauma, my first forbidden feeling, what led me down the path of emotional terrorism. Then you'll write a very thorough report about the neurological basis of my deviancy. And tomorrow they'll drill it all away." Something flickered in her expression. "That's the protocol, yes. So why do you look like you'd rather be anywhere else?" She flinched. A tiny movement, quickly suppressed, but he caught it. He'd learned to read people in the spaces between their words, in the micro-expressions the ministry's training couldn't fully erase. "I don't look like anything," she said, but her voice was too careful. "I'm here to do my job." "Right." He studied her face, cataloging details. The way her thumb worried at the edge of her tablet, the slight tremor in her hands, the compliance chip behind her ear, a newer model than Marin's, almost invisible. "How long have you been with the ministry?" 3 months. She sat on the stool they'd provided, maintaining the prescribed 3-foot distance. "I'm still in my probationary period. Fresh out of the academy. Let me guess, top of your class. Recruited for your brilliant thesis on the neuroscience of pride and its suppression." Her jaw tightened. My academic record isn't relevant to, it's relevant to why you're here. He leaned forward, not enough to threaten, just enough to close the space between them. They didn't send you to evaluate me. They sent you to test you, to see if you're ministry material. If you can look at someone like me, someone who's helped 12 people die happy, and not feel anything dangerous. I don't feel, liar. The word hung between them like a struck bell. Dr. Cross stared at him, her carefully maintained composure cracking at the edges. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. You helped them die. How is that not murder? It is murder, Cale said softly. I never claimed otherwise. I'm a killer who gives people exactly what they ask for. One moment of absolute truth, no matter the cost. The real question is, what does the ministry do? They give people 70 years of living death and call it mercy. We give people peace, stability, a world without the wars and suffering that pride and passion caused. You give them a cage and tell them it's freedom. He watched her hands tighten on the tablet. How many times have you felt it, doctor? That thing underneath the chip, scratching at the edges of your calm. The sense that you're supposed to be more than this. Stop. But she didn't leave. 3 months, he continued quietly. That's barely enough time for the chip to fully integrate. You're still close enough to remember who you were before they installed it. Still close enough to feel the edges of everything they took from you. You don't know anything about me. I know you volunteered for the academy. He said it gently, like an accusation wrapped in understanding. Nobody gets conscripted into the ministry anymore. You chose this, which means some part of you believed in it, believed the world needed to be made safe from feeling. But now you're here, and I'm looking at you the way I looked at all the others, and you're terrified because you can feel it too. Feel what? Her voice cracked. The wanting. The silence that followed was immense. Dr. Cross stared at him, her dark eyes wide, her breath coming faster. The chip behind her ear pulsed. He could see the faint light through her skin, blue as drowning. She should have left, should have called for guards, should have activated the panic protocols that would flood the cell with sedatives and save her from this dangerous proximity to truth. Instead, she asked, "What's it like?" The kiss. Cale felt his heart seize. Not again, not another one. You read my file, he said. You know what it does. I read 12 autopsy reports. Cause of death, cardiac arrest induced by catastrophic neural overload. But I didn't read what it felt like. You're the only one left who knows. Dr. Cross, Sienna. She set down the tablet. Her hands were shaking. My name is Sienna, and I need to know. Before they finish installing this chip, before I forget how to ask questions, before I become just another compliance officer who thinks numbness is the same as peace, I need to know if it's real. If what's real, everything they took from us. Her eyes were bright now, feverish. Love, pride, the kind of joy that doesn't come from chemical stabilization. I need to know if it exists outside the history texts, outside the cautionary tales they taught us in the academy. Because if it doesn't, if the ministry's right, and emotion is just evolutionary noise that causes suffering, then maybe this is the best humanity can do. But if it's real, she trailed off, the unspoken implication hanging between them like smoke. Cale felt the weight of his stones, all 12 of them, pressing against his chest. He thought of Marin's last words, "Thank you." He thought of the sirens outside the factory, the years in this cell ahead of him, the procedure that would turn him into someone who couldn't remember why any of it mattered. He thought of this young woman in her ministry whites, still new enough to ask dangerous questions, still human enough to want impossible answers. "It's real," he said quietly. "Everything they told you to fear, it's all real. And it's worth every terrible thing they said about it." Sienna closed her eyes. A single tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. The chip pulsed harder, trying to suppress the cascade of feeling that small confession had triggered. But Cale could see her fighting it, clinging to the crack in her conditioning like it was the edge of the world. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't be them. I thought I could. I thought if I just stayed numb enough, clinical enough, I could help people, save them from themselves. But every day I watch the procedures, watch people come out hollow, and you want to feel," Cale finished. She opened her eyes. They were full of everything the ministry had tried to kill. "I want to be whole," she said, "just once, even if it's only for a moment." No, the word rose in Cale's throat. He'd carried 12 stones, and each one had carved pieces from his soul. He'd thought himself ready to carry more, thought he understood the cost. But looking at Sienna, this brilliant young woman who'd believed in the ministries, lies enough to give them 3 months of her life, who was now unraveling in front of him, he felt something he'd trained himself never to feel. "Doubt, you don't want this," he said. "Sienna, you don't tell me what I want." Her voice was steel. "I've had the ministry, the chip, my entire education telling me what I should want. You're the first person who's looked at me like I might know my own mind. You'll die. I know. There's no coming back. No second chances. One kiss, one moment of truth, and then I'm free." She stood, closing the distance the ministry prescribed. 3 feet. 2. 1. Close enough that he could smell her antiseptic and fear, and something underneath, something wild. "Isn't that what you told all the others? Isn't that the promise you made?" Cale felt like he was falling. "I never promised anything. I just gave them a choice. Then give me one too." She was right in front of him now. He could see the pulse in her throat, rapid and desperate. The chip behind her ear blazed blue-white, flooding her system with every suppressant the ministry had engineered. It wasn't enough. She was drowning in feeling, and no amount of chemical calm could save her now. "If I do this," he said slowly, "they'll know. They monitor everything in these cells. The moment your heart stops, they'll come. And they'll know I'm still dangerous, still capable of good." Sienna's laugh was broken glass. "Let them know. Let them understand they can't chip it away, can't drill it out, can't make us all into their perfect, peaceful robots. Let them know that even here, even now, someone chose to feel." One more stone, Cale thought. One more weight to carry through whatever half-life they leave me with after the procedure. But looking at Sienna, at the desperate hope in her eyes, the way she held herself like she was already halfway gone, he knew he'd never forgive himself if he refused. She'd go back to her ministry duties, and the chip would finish its work. And in 6 months, she'd be just another Dr. Cross, filing reports on dangerous deviants while the spark that made her human slowly died behind her eyes. At least this way, she'd burn bright. Okay, he whispered. Okay. But I need you to understand this isn't mercy. This isn't salvation. It's just truth. And truth is the cruelest thing in the world. I know. She cupped his face in her hands. They were warm, trembling. Kiss me anyway. Cale had kissed 12 people goodbye. He'd learned to detach, to think of it as a service rendered, a final gift. But as he looked at Sienna, young enough to still have her whole life ahead of her, brilliant enough to have found some other way, he felt the stones shift inside him. 12 weights becoming 13. Lucky 13. I'll remember you, he promised. Whatever they do to me tomorrow, I'll remember. That's all I wanted. She smiled, sad and certain. To matter enough to remember. When he kissed her, she tasted like everything the ministry had tried to destroy. The severance was immediate. He felt her gasp against his lips as the neural cascade began. All the memories the chip had been slowly eroding, flooding back in a rush. A childhood spent climbing trees and singing off-key. A dissertation written in secret, questioning whether the ministry's cures were worse than the diseases. A moment last week when she'd watched a sunset and felt something the chip couldn't name, something that made her wonder if compliance was the same as cowardice. She felt it all. Every suppressed tear, every swallowed laugh, every time she'd been told to be smaller, quieter, less. And underneath it, rising like a tide pride, the fierce, dangerous pride of being wholly herself. Her heart stuttered. The chip screamed warnings. Sienna just held him tighter. Thank you, she whispered. The same last words Marin had spoken. Maybe they all did in the end. Maybe gratitude was the final human response to being allowed to feel. Then she was gone, her body growing still in his arms, her face frozen in that expression he knew too well, transcendent, joyful, free. Cale held her as the alarms began to shriek. He heard boots thundering down the corridor, heard the cell door hiss open, heard someone shouting about containment breach and emergency procedures. He just held her, counting the freckles across her nose, memorizing the way her fingers curled against his chest. 13 stones now. Unlucky 13. They ripped her from his arms. Guards in riot gear, their faces hidden behind visors, treating him like a biological weapon. They threw him against the wall, restraining cuffs biting into his wrists, someone's knee in his spine. What did you do? A voice, sharp with panic. How did you? There's no physical contact allowed, she asked, Cale said calmly. Blood from his split lip painted his words red. She came in here, and she asked, and I gave her what she wanted. You murdered a ministry doctor. I freed her. He turned his head, catching one last glimpse of Sienna's body as they loaded her onto a gurney. Her face still wore that smile, and she died whole. More than you can say for the rest of us. They dragged him out, down corridors that smelled like fear and bleach. Not to his cell, somewhere worse. Somewhere they took the truly dangerous ones. The Reformation Chamber. It was larger than Cale had imagined. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying neural maps and synaptic patterns. In the center, a chair that looked too much like a throne, its metal gleaming under surgical lights. This was where the ministry performed its deepest miracles, where they didn't just suppress emotion, but rewrote the architecture of desire itself. They strapped him in. Dr. Chen, the head of neurological reformation, approached with a scanner. He was old, ancient by ministry standards, his face a road map of everyone he'd helped erase. Interesting, he murmured, studying the readouts. Your neural patterns show extensive damage from prolonged emotional exposure, but the core capacity for the severance remains intact. Almost as if he looked up, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. How many people have you kissed? 13. Cale didn't bother lying. 13 people who chose to die free rather than live compliant. And you remember all of them. Every single one. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. That's the danger, isn't it? Not the kiss itself, we can suppress that easily enough. But the remembering, the way you carry them, that's what makes you truly dangerous. Because someone has to, Cale said. Someone has to bear witness. Someone has to remember that we were more than the ministry's experiments in controlled humanity. Noble, Dr. Chen's smile was pitying, but futile. By tomorrow, you won't remember your own name, let alone theirs. Scrub every trace of rebellion from your brain, install new compliance protocols, and release you back into society as a productive citizen. You'll get a job in sanitation, maybe, or data processing, something that requires minimal thought and maximal obedience. And if it doesn't work, it always works. Dr. Chen picked up the neural drill, a delicate instrument that looked like a silver spider. Eventually, but as he moved to position the drill, alarms erupted throughout the facility. Code Violet in Block F. Multiple subjects experiencing simultaneous chip rejection. Containment breach in the female wing. We have 17 cases of spontaneous emotional cascade. Sir, we're getting reports from the underground. There's been a broadcast. Someone's been transmitting. Dr. Chen froze, his hand still gripping the drill. What kind of broadcast? The technician's face had gone pale. It's her, Dr. Cross. Before she died, she must have activated her recording chip. The whole conversation with subject 471, it's been streaming to every underground network in the city. They're calling it the testimony. They're saying what? Dr. Chen's voice was ice. That if a ministry doctor chose the kiss, maybe we all should. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from somewhere deep in the facility, Cale heard it. Someone screaming. Not in pain, in joy. The sound of a compliance chip shattering against the force of feeling too large to contain. Then another scream joined it, and another. A chorus of people remembering what it meant to be human. Dr. Chen stared at the monitors as chaos erupted across every screen. Subjects were fighting their restraints. Guards were abandoning their posts. Doctors were pulling out their own chips with shaking hands. The Contrition Center, the ministry's most secure facility, was tearing itself apart. What have you done? He whispered. Cale thought of Sienna in her ministry whites, asking dangerous questions. He thought of her deliberately activating her recording chip before she came to his cell, knowing exactly what she was doing. Not a victim of the severance, a martyr for it. I didn't do anything, he said. She did. She made her choice, and she made sure the whole city knew she had won. The straps on the chair were already loosening as the power fluctuated. Guards were running past the Reformation chamber, too occupied with the spreading chaos to care about one prisoner. Dr. Chen just stood there, the neural drill hanging forgotten in his hand, watching his life's work crumble on the monitors. "They'll restore order," he said hollowly. "They always do. Maybe." Cale felt the final strap give way. He stood, muscles screaming from hours of restraint. Or maybe this is how it ends. Not with a revolution, just with enough people asking what comes after compliance. Walked toward the door. No one stopped him. The guards were gone, the technicians had abandoned their posts, and Dr. Chen just watched him go with the expression of a man seeing his god die. Cale stepped into corridors full of smoke and sirens. People ran past him in all directions, some fleeing, some fighting, some just standing still with wonder on their faces as they felt real emotion for the first time in years. The ministry's perfect order was dissolving into beautiful chaos. He didn't run. He walked, counting his stones. 13 names, 13 faces, 13 revolutions contained in a kiss. But Sienna had done something different. She turned her death into a broadcast, her final moment into a message that spread through the city like wildfire. She'd shown the ministry's own doctor, young, brilliant, supposedly loyal, choosing truth over compliance. And in doing so, she'd given everyone else permission to want more than the half-life they'd been assigned. Cale found his way outside. The streets were chaos, people pouring from buildings, pulling out chips with bloody fingers, embracing in ways that would have triggered immediate arrest yesterday. The ministry's order was fracturing, and no amount of neural drills could fix it now. He thought of Marin, who'd chosen to feel. He thought of David and Lucia and all the others. He thought of Sienna, who'd been brave enough to make her choice public. 13 stones, each one heavy as the world. Each one proof that humanity couldn't be chipped away, drilled out, made docile and safe. As long as someone remembered, as long as someone carried the weight of those who'd chosen to burn bright rather than fade slow, the ministry would never truly win. In the distance, the contrition center burned. Smoke rose against the gray sky like a prayer. Cale pulled out his battered notebook, somehow still in his jacket pocket, somehow preserved through processing and restraint. He found a wall away from the chaos, away from the running people and the sirens and the falling order. And he began to sketch. Not the dead, but the living. Not the final moments, but the first ones, all those people in the streets, feeling for the first time in years, messy and terrified and wholly, impossibly themselves. He sketched until his hands cramped, until the smoke cleared and the sirens faded and the city grew quiet again, not the compliance quiet of before, but the uncertain quiet of people waking up and asking, what now? The answer, Cale knew, wouldn't come from him. It would come from all the Siennas and Marins and Davids, everyone brave enough to ask for truth, even when it cost everything. He'd just been the guillotine. They'd been the revolution. And in the gray city of new penitence, on the day the ministry's order finally broke, 13 stones didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. Somewhere in the underground, in rooms the ministry didn't know about yet, people gathered around screens showing Dr. Sienna Cross's final testimony. watched her walk into cell 7, Block C. They heard her ask dangerous questions. They saw her choose. And one by one, they began to understand. Compliance wasn't peace. It was just another word for surrender. The revolution, as it turned out, was contagious, and no amount of chips could make them forget how to feel.